What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up. Anthony Sanfilippo's here. I'm Bob Wankel. And we are recording our first podcast since we saw the main storyline of spring training, that being Andrew Painter take the mound on Wednesday. We got to look at him. We see now what it looks like with the Phillies uniform on. Pitched 2 innings against the Minnesota Twins. And you know what? I just want to put out there right away. We're going to be a little bit quicker today. We got some things going on. I know that we always say this and we end up recording for about an hour or so, but we do have about a 30-minute hard stop in this podcast. And that's okay, Anthony, because I don't know about you, but on March 3rd, as we sit here and talk, this is, I believe, the 6th or 7th podcast we've done since we've come back. And I need something here. It's like
for sure.
It's a long way to go before opening day.
Hey.
I know that we'll see Taijuan Walker. We're going to see Rhys Hoskins later today, but man,
yeah, no, and not only that, if we want to be totally transparent, I'm still doing hockey stuff, and today is the NHL trade deadline, so I'm a little tied up with that today too. So we got to keep it short.
You are watching this on YouTube, and you see Anthony looking down at his phone every 30 seconds.
Now you know why.
I don't think he's generally going to be that bored by my opinions, but maybe just a good disclaimer there to know that he's looking down at the phone and seeing what's going on with the Flyers. So, oh boy, so talk about being on the opposite end of the spectrum right now with this Phillies team. And listen, we said coming into this spring that the storyline is obviously what happens with the 5th starter. What are they going to do with that spot? I guess my expectation coming in is that they were going to go to Painter if he showed that he was worthy of the spot. I think that we're still so far away from truly knowing, is he ready for this? Can he consistently string together quality appearances and hit the ground running? Because I think that's what the Phillies want. It's not like, let's go through a bunch of growing pains with Andrew Painter in April. But if he shows himself to be worthy of the spot, he probably gets it. My question to you would be, well, go ahead.
No. And no, go ahead. Ask the question, because I think that we're probably going to be on the same page here. Go ahead.
My question is, we've seen now pretty much everybody that could potentially take hold of this spot, whether it be Bailey Falter, Nick Nelson, or Plasmeyer, or whoever else. Do you really think at the end of the day, any of these guys are going to, certainly they don't present the upside that Painter does, but do any of these guys really excite you?
Look, I think that there's something with Bailey Falter. They've had him hang around for a bit now. I mean, obviously he pitched well down the stretch for them last year, right? I still think that there's legit value there. I think that I'm not thinking he's going to ever become anywhere near a top of the rotation kind of guy. But at the same time, I do think that he's, when you watch him pitch, Bob, his delivery is so incredible. He is so close to the plate when he lets go of the ball. He's one of those guys who's got that real long stride. And so being a left-handed pitcher, that can be a real advantage once he figures out some things. I just like his approach. I don't necessarily think he's going to be a superstar by any stretch of the imagination, but do I think Bailey Falter can be a guy who you can rely on either in the back end of your rotation or out of the bullpen? Yeah, I do. And I think that he's a guy that can be on a championship contending team.
I think that part of my reasoning for, maybe it's because it's so early in March and it's so early on to really say hey, this guy's won the spot or he's owed this spot. It's just that I know that both players are going to factor into this picture. It's not like a one or the other proposition. It's not like, oh, well, if Andrew Painter wins it, we'll never hear from Bailey Falter again, or vice versa. So that's why I'm kind of I don't know. To what extent does this truly matter? I think that we all know that Andrew Painter is going to be up at some point, probably early on, whether it's that first week and he's pitching in New York or it's the first week of May. So I think because of that, I don't necessarily look at this with maybe the same interest that you would be looking at a normal battle for a job or a spot. But that being said, I mean, listen, we both watched it. Appreciate the MLB TV login, by the way.
Yeah, you got it, man. No problem.
I texted you. I said, come on with this. I'm not paying for MLB TV today. Go to half the games. I don't need this. And Anthony came up big for me. But, we both watched the we'll call it the start. And, I mean, listen, you see what it's all about, right? It hits 99. He's throwing strikes. 18 of his 29 pitches were for strikes. Did not mix in the curveball at all. It was all first pitch fastballs. They were obviously trying to get him comfortable, trying to establish himself here early in the spring. So I wouldn't really get too crazy about the results, which were fine. 1 run over 2 innings, gave up a couple hits in that second inning. And I guess Correa had a broken bat single in the first, or it was
an infield hit, yeah.
But the thing I guess was more interesting than, hey, we know he throws hard and we know that he has poise and composure. We've heard all of that. The thing I guess that was most interesting to me was after the game, obviously the reporters go over and they talk to Carlos Correa, who knows a thing or two about playing at an elite level. And he comes out and says, yeah, I think this kid's going to be a star. Now, I don't know if he was just throwing him a bone, throwing him hey, nice job, kid. And why not? I'll say something nice about you and give you some confidence. But I mean, I don't know. I don't think that Carlos Correa would just kind of go right to hyperbole just for the sake of it.
Right.
High praise, man.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's really good. And like you said, I mean, there wasn't a lot of pitching going on. It was just more of, hey, let's get you out there, show off that fastball that everybody talks about, and, face some legit major league hitters and see how you do, and just kind of, take it from there. Like, I don't think that they are results oriented yet, of course, with first starts. And, we had a couple other guys that, we were talking about briefly via text that are, interesting candidates or interesting prospects from the mound who didn't look good against Boston yesterday. Like Griff McGarry didn't look great, and Andrew Baker had a meltdown inning. He couldn't find the strike zone. But again, I think that those are things that you're working out. You're trying to figure out what these guys are, and I'm not certain that the results matter so much. But what I think is, and that's important from a Phillies perspective, really not so much from us for our perspective, watching them and documenting them, is when you have a competition like this. Obviously, like you said, it's going to be Painter's job in the long run. Falter is going to be part of this in probably in a bigger way than maybe anybody even realizes. But I think from a Phillies perspective, creating this competition in spring training, even though they know that multiple guys are going to be used, is important to see how these guys respond to the notion of you're in a challenge, in a race for the job, right? I mean, and I think they want to see.
He talked about that. He's like, This is nothing new to me. I've done this 3 straight years now, and he knows this time he can actually win the spot, whereas he's always been that 6th or 7th guy rotational depth. So it is a little different, but it's not entirely different for him.
Right. No, but I'm saying it's more about, they're watching these guys, how they're handling themselves. How are they handling their outings? How are they handling their bullpen sessions? How are they, are they nervous as hell because they think they're going to lose the job, kind of thing like that. These are the things that they're looking for that we're not seeing on television. So, I think that like for the Phillies, that's why it's important. But for us, you're right. We're watching from afar going, yeah, these guys are going to be involved. It doesn't really matter, but it matters to the Phillies.
Do you think that McGarry's really actually in this mix? Like, I almost have a thought here that, because I don't either. Yeah.
No.
I mean, my thought is that almost including him in this mix is to sort of elevate his stature within the organization, maybe outside the organization.
Yeah, his profile. Right.
Yeah, like I'm not sitting here telling you that the Phillies are going to be actively shopping him come late July or anything like that, but like maybe they are. I just think it's more of like let's get him on the radar. Like, let's put him on the spot. Sort of kind of lends itself to what you were just talking about. Like, let's put some pressure on you. Let's make you part of the mix and see how you respond to it. But to me, there's nothing that he can do this spring that's going to win him this job. I just don't see that.
No, he's not there. I mean, he's a guy that maybe comes up during the season and they use out of the bullpen a little bit. And just to kind of get him some time later in the year. I do think that that's a possibility, especially since he's a little bit older than the other guys. I mean, he's already 23. A lot of people forget that. I mean, right. Painter's 19 and McAble's 21. McGarry's already 23. So like he's kind of at that age where it's like, okay, we really got to start to ramp that up and see if you're a guy who could be there, and you're not going to keep pitching in the minors for 5 years. Right. So I do think that there's something to what you're saying. And I also think that you're right, that if you're looking at the Phillies prospects, and if your top 3 prospects are all pitchers, all starting pitchers, but you have a rotation that has Wheeler and Nola and Suarez and Painter and Taijuan Walker, maybe one of those guys, maybe a guy like McGarry, is a guy that you can use as a asset that could be moved to improve your team where you feel it needs to be improved later this year. So yes, I agree. I think that that's kind of what they're doing with Griff McGarry.
Yeah, and I mean, I've pointed out a couple times on the show that you can't get all caught up in one appearance, especially this early on. And I mean, I guess as it relates to McGarry, you kind of say, okay, that's true. He struggled with command yesterday, really struggled with command yesterday. I'm not overly concerned about that. You saw the stuff, but it was a Devers, I think he got on strikes, and you're like, all right, wow, like look at the arm here. Then he ran into some trouble. But then you kind of correlate it back to what you saw from him last year. And as good as he was with the strikeout stuff, I mean, you're talking about 5.5 walks per 9 in the minors last season. So to see him come out and really kind of not really have, I would say, any command is somewhat concerning. Now, Rob Thompson talked to reporters yesterday after that appearance and said, listen, I've watched him throw bullpens. I've watched him throw live BP. He's been in the zone with all of his pitches. I'm not concerned about it. Again, what's he really going to say? You want to see how he responds, though. To me, it's like, okay, again, you can't make that generalization or you can't make that conclusion, but you have to at least pocket it and say, like, I watched that. Now, how are you going to respond? And similarly, you go back to what we talked about last weekend with Andrew Baker, and we were all like, wow, like that was eye-opening, right?
Right.
Well, then you see him come back and has no command, struggles a little bit in that next appearance. And so, like, this is what I said I guess it was maybe last week before that. What you can do this time of year is open eyes and say, okay, there's some potential here. There's a little bit of ability. There's a little bit of ceiling, but you cannot get all goofy about the results when like it is about consistency. Can you do it 2, 3, 4, 5 times together? And, it's early on right now. We're not seeing that consistency. We'll see what happens. I'm very, very curious to see Andrew Painter, not so much this next time, but when they lengthen him out a little bit, maybe start to mix a little bit more in you get not the next appearance, but the one after that. Like, that's the one I start to key on and say, like, what do we have here? Is he ready to go? Can he help this team win immediately?
Yeah, I think his next appearance is Tuesday. And I'll be there against Tampa. And then the one after that, I believe, is the following Sunday against Toronto, if I'm mapping it out correctly. And I think that's probably the one that you're sitting there saying, yeah, that's the one I want to see. Because you're going to face, again, and you're facing Toronto, you're facing a really legit major league lineup, but the Blue Jays are basically around the corner. Dunedin is the closest spring training home of another team to the Phillies in Clearwater. So when, sometimes when you have to travel, you don't always send like your full roster or your best guys to go play somebody else. But Toronto and Phillies really have like this symbiotic relationship and have for many, many years, where when they play each other in their other team's park, they are sending a pretty good lineup because of how close they are, right? So I think that that's probably the one you're looking at if he stays on the schedule that he's on. That Toronto game on March 12th is the one that you're going to be really kind of interested to see, because he's probably going to throw 4 innings that game. If that's probably the plan, let's get him to throw 4 innings and see what happens against a really good lineup. So that will be the one that I think everybody will be keeping their eyes on.
And that's right at the point in the calendar where I think you start looking at the results. You have to become results oriented at some point.
Right? Yes.
If you're a 7-year, established veteran with a great track record, no. Like if you're still hitting 112 at that point, not terribly concerned. But when you're talking about young guys vying for a spot, it's a competition. Hey, like that right around there to me, third time out. That's where you start to say, like, what are we getting from a results standpoint?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that we've adequately covered what you can cover for a fifth starting spot. At this point, I would not be surprised as just a finishing thought that they will go to a 6-man rotation at some point.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Thompson was asked about this. And
he was, yeah.
And he did say, at first, probably not.
Right.
But he did say that there is a stretch where it could come into play, and that stretch goes April 8th through April 23rd. They don't have a day off.
Right.
Right. And that's early in the season, and you really don't want to, push guys too hard that early. Got a little bit of travel in there, not far. I mean, Cincinnati and Chicago, the White Sox. And so probably somewhere in there, I wouldn't be surprised to see them go 6 starters. But I don't think there's a need for it, in the beginning part of the season when you have 2 off days in the first 9 games, right? I mean, in there, you don't need 6. You don't even need 5 starters. You could probably carry an extra arm in the bullpen or an extra bat on the bench, whatever you want to do, and then worry about adding the extra starter, sometime during that stretch where there's no days off.
So what I wonder is, do they kind of use that as an opportunity to let Painter, I guess, limit the workload right off the bat? Do they kind of bring him into the picture? And this kind of goes back to what I said, like, does it really matter in the long run? But do they kind of slot him in as the 6th guy at the start, or do they use Falter as that 6th guy? And I think that's really what this is all about right now.
Yeah, and it's really kind of interesting. I mean, I've already stated on the pod before that I don't think Painter breaks camp with them. I don't think
what's interesting? I wanted to mention that, and you said that, and I know you're still there. Do you find it at all like kind of, I don't know, interesting, I guess, for the lack of a better word, that almost everybody you talk to is like, I wouldn't be surprised if he makes it? Like, are they signaling to reporters down there? I mean, like, you had Jason Stark the other day on 97.5 come on, basically say, like, yeah, like, I wouldn't be surprised.
And Bob, maybe once I'm down there and I start talking to people, I maybe my tone on this will flip. Right? I'm giving an opinion from afar at this point. But I did hear something interesting, and this is what I was going to say. I did hear something interesting. Somebody suggested to me, well, in baseball, and that this happens, there's something about, letting the guy make the team if he earned the spot in spring training. It's more symbolic than anything else, but it really jumpstarts a player, kind of gets a player, hey, I made the team. I beat out veterans for this spot, and maybe he does get sent down again or whatever, but to send him to Texas on the roster, there's something to that, right? And so I'm thinking about it. I'm saying maybe that is something. Maybe that's something for a 19-year-old kid. Maybe that's a big boost.
Yeah, do the Phillies want to say, like, this kid is a 19-year-old, made the team out of spring training? Like, to say that about him, like, he's the one guy, like, we talk about how conservative the Phillies are with prospects, to be the guy that not only bucks the trend, but bucks the trend to that degree. I mean, that would be quite an honor, something that attached to this kid.
Right. And like I said, he doesn't even have to play. He could just be with the team for that first week, not even see the mound, get sent down, and then brought back up when they need him, during that stretch in April. And I guess the answer is yes, he made the team, even if he doesn't pitch, right? So I think that's a possibility.
Would you rather see him make that first start on the road, I guess, at New York, or would you rather see him make that first start at Citizens Bank Park? Or does it not matter?
Well, look, ultimately, I don't think it really matters. But again, if you're trying to nurture a 19-year-old kid, right, who you've been promoting the hell out of, and fans are really excited about, if you set up his first start at Citizens Bank Park. Well, no, that's what I'm saying.
Go get him.
Right. But I mean, when you look at who the Phillies, the first teams that they're playing at home, obviously the opening weekend is Cincinnati. I don't think that's it because there's an off day in there. But then you have Miami, and then you have Colorado. I mean, you got teams there that look, Miami's decent, and Colorado is Colorado. They're terrible on the road. They're good at home. I think one of those starts makes a lot more sense. And you get him in front of a crowd that's excited to see him and will support the hell out of him. And if he has a good start, they're giving him a standing ovation, and this kid's going to be like, it's going to mean the world to him, right? I mean, so I think that's probably a better plan than trotting him out in the Bronx, with the crazy Yankee fans.
I would say that is not an ideal scenario whatsoever. But and as one more thought on him, I mean, the one other takeaway that I guess I came away with on Wednesday was, like, and you've heard people say this, he does not look like he's 19 years old. Like, he is not built like a 19-year-old. He does not walk like a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
He certainly has composure far beyond that of what a 19-year-old would have on the major league mound. It's so interesting because this team is a World Series contender. This team is a viable postseason threat. And even if he isn't ready, they still can be.
Yeah.
But like, it's not like, oh my God, the Phillies' fate, at least not right now, at least not in theory coming into the season. It's not like the fate of the Phillies this season in 2023 rests entirely on his right shoulder.
Correct.
I just look at it and it's just so interesting because if this guy can be, if he can even scratch the surface of what people think he can be and he can do it right away, it really, I think, just changes the whole way that people think about this team. If you go 5-6 deep in this rotation to that degree, like, we've hinted at this. We're not making predictions yet. We haven't really talked about the projections, but man, it would be a game changer.
Yeah, no, it would. It really would. You should be excited about Andrew Painter. The Phillies should be excited about him. The fans should be excited about him. And yes, they should temper their expectations to say that this guy's not coming in to be like a savior or to really kind of say, well, he's going to be the difference between, getting to the World Series and actually winning it. It's a lot to ask of a 19-year-old kid. And even if you look back at the starters who had great careers, who did come into the league that young, those first years, they were good, but they weren't superstar quality right off the bat. Okay. That being said, I think that there's reason to have great excitement and look forward to this by all means, Bob. Yeah, it's a cool thing. It's a cool thing. And it was funny. Like, we broke up our day to make sure that we were able to watch 2 innings of Andrew Painter pitching in spring training, right?
I was on a Microsoft Teams meeting. I was on a work meeting, and I was like, "Oh wait, yeah, hold on," and I turned the camera off so I could pull up MLB TV next to the screen. So I'm off my meeting, my work meeting, and then I have Andrew Painter thrown to the left of it on my desktop. So
yeah,
it was we definitely broke it up for sure. So listen, I guess the other interesting bullet points before you get down there next week, we are recording this on Friday, very early on Friday. We have Taijuan Walker making his spring debut, or his Phillies debut too, I guess. And then we also have Rhys Hoskins, who's coming back from meniscus cleanup. The first look that we'll get at him. Or first look we'll get of him. I guess, like, again, I don't really need to see anything out of Taijuan Walker today. Like, there's no result that would make me go, wow, or really give me significant concern. Rhys Hoskins, are you confident that he will in fact be ready to go? I mean, it seems like the fact that he's getting live game action this soon, only a few days later than everyone else, kind of would signal to me that, like, yeah, this isn't really a big concern. Any potential lingering effects here?
Well, I mean, he did have knee surgery. I mean, granted, it was meniscus, right? So it wasn't like a major reconstruction or anything like that. As someone who's had that surgery before, I can tell you, and I was young when I had it, so it wasn't like I'm, in my 40s when I had it, but it's still about a month, of before you really start to feel yourself again. He had the surgery earlier. He's been working out. I mean, he's to the point where he can play games now. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a chance you look at a guy and say, could he potentially start off a little bit slower, or maybe he's going to DH a couple times more in the beginning of the season, and somebody else will play some first base. I think that's a real possibility, Bob. You might see a few games early where Rhys is DHing. Maybe you put Bohm at first and Josh Harrison plays third, or Sosa plays third, whatever. I think that's something that will happen. I don't necessarily think he's going to miss any time, but I do think that there's a possibility that they take it slow and cautious with Rhys a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to miss any time whatsoever, but you did get right to where I wanted to go, which is, do you think that the Phillies will maybe be a little bit more rotational in how they utilize the designated hitter this season? Like last year, obviously Bryce Harper put them in a spot when he came back where he had to be the DH. understandable. But even prior to that, they were fairly rigid in how they deployed the DH. And Rhys Hoskins wasn't really part of that mix. And I do wonder this season, Rhys Hoskins being one of these guys, but I do wonder if they're going to be a little bit more diverse in how they rotate through on this.
Yeah, the only thing is that, and again, and this might lead us into, I know one other small topic that we wanted to discuss today. This might lead us into Cody Clemens a little bit. So you really didn't have a great backup first base option, right? I mean, Real Muto can play first base if you want to, give him a break from behind the plate. Bohm can play first base. He's not great at first base either. So you really didn't have a lot of first base. Derek Hall, I guess, if he's on your team as the DH, left-handed DH to start the season, he could play first base. But none of these guys are like really good there. And they're just, yes, they're bodies you can put at first base, but aren't anything that you're excited about. When they made the trade for Soto and they got Clemens as part of the deal, Dombrowski had a lot of good things to say about Cody Clemens, and that they really think that he's a guy that can be a bench player for them. And then right after that, they went out and signed Josh Harrison, and we kind of thought, okay, well, that makes Clemens, a quad A guy, basically, minor league guy who you get called up if there's an injury to be on your bench. But now I'm starting to wonder about that, Bob. I mean, he's getting they're getting a good look at him. He's playing a bunch early here. He can play 3 infield positions. You mentioned before the show, he even played a little bit of outfield last year for Detroit. And they bring his dad in to talk to the team. He hits a home run, nice home run in the game was yesterday against Boston. So like there's a lot of Cody Clemens kind of stuff. And the last time I had this feeling, if you remember, a few years back, the way they were playing Phil Gosselin in spring training, and I was thinking about it, I was like, he reminds me of that, in the sense that they look at a player and how they let him play and whatever, and as long as he keeps producing in spring training, you go, we got to find a spot on the bench for this guy. If he continues to produce this way, I wouldn't be surprised if he makes the team as the 26th man, as the last guy on the bench. And so if that's the case, he can play some first base in certain instances, and you can put Rhys as DH and not feel like you have to move all those other pieces around.
Yeah, worth keeping an eye on. Like, as you noted, played first base, second base, third base, and some left field last year. He's versatile, 26 years old, makes his major league debut last season, only hits a .145, 5 homers, OPS of 505. Stats were not great during that debut season, but you talk about the way that he's been sort of deployed here early on, 2 homers, 9 at-bats. He's 4 for 9 in the early going, getting a long look. Roger Clemens is in camp. I don't know. You might be onto something there. But a guy that a week ago I would have said, no shot. Now I'm saying not likely, but on the radar.
Yeah, maybe maybe, I don't think he's beating out Josh Harrison. I don't think he's beating out Edmundo Sosa. I think those guys are on the bench and on the team. But does he beat out Dalton Guthrie?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's a possibility. And I know that limits you a little bit with center field in case Marsh can't play. But I think you find a way. Like if there's a problem, you can make a roster move, right? And do the thing that you need to do and get Guthrie back up here. I just think Clemens has a shot of making this team. I really do.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a one last thing today, or are you?
I have one last Phillies thing, and then I have one last thing. So the one last Phillies thing, something that happened since, and this is quick, something that happened since we last spoke on this pod is MLB.com put out their prospect rankings by team, and I think they're still actually in the middle of doing it, but they released the Phillies one earlier in the week, and so they put out their top 30 rankings, and it's not much of a surprise. Painter, Abel, McGarry are your top 3. Then Justin Crawford, who was their first round pick last year, Carl Crawford's son, the outfielder, is number 4. A couple of names I just wanted to kind of throw at you that jumped up ahead of some names that had been on this list before. Johan Rojas, who's now number 6. Talk about center field possibilities, right? Really good defensive player. They have him listed as estimated time of arrival into the major leagues this season, which I thought was interesting. I wasn't really considering Rojas as a guy unless, injuries and you needed a guy, to come up, whatever. But he seems to be a guy that really has jumped up this list. Another guy that I wanted to mention was another guy we talked about very, very briefly a couple episodes ago, Carlos De La Cruz, the 6'8" guy who was playing some first base, but he's also playing the outfield. He's number 9, and he came out of nowhere, nowhere, and is suddenly in their top 10 prospects. So just thought it was interesting, to see a couple of names like that come up and be guys that they think could play. One guy who they think could play in the major leagues this year, and another guy who's just skyrocketed into their top 10 prospect list.
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up. I mean, looking at Rojas, I don't know that he can hit. I don't know that he would be able to hit for this team at even a consistently mediocre level this year.
Yeah.
But if they get jammed up with center field and they just say, you know what, we have a deep lineup, we're strong, we need to, as your son has suggested in previous episodes, Brandon Marsh is actually really built for a corner outfield position. They really wanted to go all in defensively in center right now. I mean, he could step in and do it and probably play at an elite level. So, I don't know that we'll see him in 23, but things get a little weird out there. It's very possible.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting. Now, again, when you see that they say that, estimated time of arrival 2023, they could also be looking at it and saying that could be a September call up, right? I mean, and that's part of 23. Okay. So we're not saying during the season. But yeah, I just thought that those two names were the ones that stuck out to me on that prospect list of being where they're at. So just thought I'd throw that out there. As for one last thing, and I thought this was a pretty funny story, and I wanted to throw it your way, but I think it's something that's kind of interesting. So Minnesota was playing Tampa down in spring training. I don't know if you saw this, but the PitchCom device that the catcher for Minnesota, Tony Wolters, was using was so loud that the Tampa Rays hitters could hear every pitch that was called. And the plate umpire said he heard every pitch through the system. And now Kenta Maeda was on the mound while this was happening. He still threw 2 scoreless innings, right? So that's pretty good work by him. But nevertheless, PitchCom, you can hear it. That's a whole different kind of pitch tipping than banging trash cans or giving signs from second base, right? I mean, holy hell, that's got to be fixed, doesn't it?
Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about that, but I'll tell you what, man, it's weird times in Major League Baseball, and I don't want to beat the hell out of this topic, but you're seeing all this stuff happen down in spring training right now. And if I would have told you 10 years ago, hey, listen, we're going to be talking about PitchCom, bigger bases, no shift anymore, pitch clocks, and I'm going to also limit you to 2 throws over to first base. You probably would have looked at me like I had 5 heads.
Yes, I would have. I absolutely would.
It's not your father's Major League Baseball anymore.
And I'm not certain. I'm not certain if it's a good thing or a bad thing yet. I really am not. I think we'll see as the real games progress and how they implement these rules. And is there any kind of do they get lenient right at some point on certain things? So we'll wait and see. One of the other things I thought was interesting, I was watching another. This is how nuts I am, with the MLB TV. I was watching another game, and there was an interview with it was Twins, and there was an interview with Carlos Correa, and he was talking to the umpire about stepping forward onto the dirt as the pitch is being delivered. And the umpire was telling him, as long as both feet are on the dirt before the pitch is delivered, they're going to let it go. He's going to let it go. Right. He said, but there are some umpires who will tell you, no, it has to be on the delivery. Yep. So baseball's got to figure that out, right? Stupid things like that. The infielders like to step forward to get into position as a pitch is being delivered. We know this. Okay. So if you're going to really be a jerk about it and call a ball on your pitcher because the guy is in motion to stepping on the dirt before the ball's thrown, as opposed to, as it's being thrown. I mean, seriously, are we going to nitpick that much over something that's stupid? It's not affecting the play in any capacity. I mean, I don't know.
I don't know if you saw yesterday, Wandy Peralta's 20-second strikeout, 3 pitches.
Yes.
And I will say, just like we talked about earlier with Andrew Painter, looking at mid-March, that 3rd week of March, the results matter. It's kind of how I'm looking at these rule changes too.
Yeah.
If we start to see by the back end of this month, those last 2 weeks leading up to the start of the regular season, there's still all of these all of these issues, all these talking points, every game, there's a new thing. Like, that's when I'll start to say, like, oh, wow, like this might have a real impact, especially those first few weeks of the season.
My favorite line of all, and we'll wrap it with this, was after Wheeler's start. And they try to get him to talk about the new rules. And he was just standing there in the dugout, just shaking his head and said, I hate him. I hate it. It's going to be bad for the game. I just hate it. And that's it. Like he wouldn't elaborate, but the look on his face and just the way he was shaking his head, it was like, man, not everybody's buying in to this at all as far as the players are concerned. So it's really going to be, and it supposedly gives pitchers an advantage. And here's one of the best pitchers in the game who can't stand them. Right. So it's really kind of an interesting thing. So yeah, I think you're right. It's going to be fun to see how this all plays out.
All right. Well, for all of you folks that say that we don't deliver, that we don't do what we say we're going to do, we did it today.
Well, we went 5 minutes over.
I said, you got the Flyers trade deadline. I've got a ton of stuff to do. Are we recording today? And Anthony said, yeah, let's do it. 10 o'clock. So we made it happen. We are here. We did it. And we will talk to you on Monday for the next episode of Crossed Up. For Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. We'll talk to you soon.